I love the getting out there, getting dirty. I used to think it was glamorous. It took me till I was about 50 before I realised actually maybe being covered in cash, it wasn't actually glamorous.
So I Heard, a podcast for cattle vets, students and anyone interested in the dairy and beef industries. It's been brought to you by the Australian Cattle Vets, a special interest group of the Australian Veterinary Association. I'm agricultural journalist Prue Adams. Hello there, and thanks for listening to our very first episode of So I Heard. We're coming to you appropriately from the Australian Cattle Veterinarians Conference in Newcastle. Joining me in the room are two outstanding senior vets, Dr. Alan Guilfoyle, known as Gilly, founder and director of Clermont Veterinary Surgery in Queensland, and Associate Professor John House from the University of Sydney. We'll also catch up remotely with Dr. Alison Gunn in East Gippsland. Alison was the first female president of the Australian Cattle Vets Group. All three have won the Bovine Practitioner of the Year award. They're leaders in the field, so I wanted to hear what they did that worked and what they'd now tell their younger selves or other early career vets. Let's first hear from Gilly, who set off on this path in the wild and free 1970s in central Queensland.
The world was your oyster if you wanted to go bush. It was quite good. One of the big saving graces at that time was that the Australian government had tuberculosis and brucellosis under eradication throughout, and it came into effect in the late 76, early 77. The Queensland government, in their wisdom, elected to put that work over to private veterinarians rather than employ their own, with the view of establishing veterinary practices and stabilising them in country areas. Fortunately, I had relations up around in the Capella district and the Peak Downs district of the Central Highlands, so I knew somewhere where I wanted to go after my 4-year stint in Bow Desert. So we went up there, and it was quite raw, and people actually welcomed a vet. It was lovely. There was no great expectations from the clientele. Oh, well, there was within reason, of course, but they were just so happy to have a vet. And of course, being a solo practitioner, I was married with 2 children, and my good wife came up with supporting. We've been married well over 55 years. She's got a great tenacity, that good woman. But we established under very, what you might term in today's primitive conditions. I think at the time, the Vet Surgeons Board didn't require registration of premises. It was only in many later years that I asked the registrar one day, do I need to register my premises? He said, don't panic. We know there's a few old fellas out like you out in the bush, but we don't worry too much. So in the ways of facilities, there wasn't too much. We got by with very basic medications, procedures, protocols to what they have today. We had shared facilities with the hospital on a very good terms. I did purchase an X-ray, but I hadn't built an X-ray developing room, so I used to develop my X-rays at the hospital. In fact, before I got a X-ray, I used to sneak the odd cat and dog in the back room, and they'd put it through. Also, I used to borrow materials. In fact, the doctor came in one day, he had a person with a broken leg. He says, could I have a box of 6-inch plaster, please, nurse? She said, sorry, doctor, the vet took it this morning to patch a horse up. So it was great. The roads were facilities. Communications was very interesting, a bit away from this microwave society we had now. The manual exchange, well, I was working by myself at the time, and I didn't have a receptionist, so the girls on the exchange were actually my receptionist. If I was out bush, I'd go and tell them where I was going, and they could track you down better than a bloodhound.
Given that you've had a whole lifetime in the profession, what would you tell your younger self starting out?
Well, lucky, I'm a little bit on the spectrum, so I haven't got tunnel vision, but I got a straightforward vision, and nothing stopped me. I just went, and it wasn't until a few things happened in the 90s that I got sat back and I became reflective. I think the big thing is look ahead, don't look back. Only to sort of meditate a bit on where you could have gone things better, but just have a go for it.
I'll move over to you now, John, and can you tell me where you first started? Because you weren't always specialising in large animals, were you?
After graduating, I ended up moving from Western Australia to Victoria and Gippsland, and worked in a really good practice down in Maui, which Bill Darmody was running, and that was a mixed practice. So there was small animals, about 50% of it, and then the other 50% was large animals, and the majority of that was dairy. And that's, I guess, where I got the interest in the dairy side of things. And at that point, things I enjoyed the most was working with livestock, and I quite enjoyed small animal surgery, but the small interaction wasn't me, whereas I did like working with producers. So after about a year and a half, 2 years, I felt like, what can I do next? How can I try to get better at what I was doing? So that's when I was looking to see if I could specialise, and that sort of started my journey, and I ended up applying to a residency program. I looked around Australia for a little bit. I didn't sort of see exactly where to go. And the US has a sort of a residency program. It's called the matching program, and you can apply, and ended up moving to California and doing a residency. That was in large animal medicine with a food animal emphasis. That was pretty extraordinary in the sense that you end up working with people who'd written the books. You'd see a case and it would have certain disease, and you'd go to read up on the disease, and then you'd realise that actually the person who wrote the chapter was the person that you were working with. And that was very informative.
Oh, amazing. What a great opportunity.
Yeah, it was fantastic. The idea was to go for a couple of years, and then after a couple of years they said, do you want to stay and do an extra year? So I did, and then I got interested in some projects along the way. We were doing some work with salmonella, and it sort of seemed unfinished. So then they said, do you want to stay and do a PhD? So I ended up doing that. And that was another three and a half years.
So what was the work on salmonella?
Initially I was looking at diagnostics. So my mentor had developed an ELISA for detecting cattle that were chronically infected with salmonella, so looking for salmonella carriers. So I did some work, or basically I went out and bled a bunch of calves and cows and detected animals that were positive on that, and then we bought them and then followed them for a year to see whether it was accurate, because they shed intermittently. And then I got interested in prevention. So when I did my PhD, I was working on vaccines as well, so we're developing a subunit vaccine.
So was a vaccine actually developed for salmonella?
Yeah, we ended up purifying out-of-membrane proteins to make a subunit vaccine. That didn't go through to fruition, but I also worked on a couple of other vaccines, an arrow delete vaccine that was marketed in the US. It's a DNA adenine methylase delete vaccine, which we did a lot more work on, but it hasn't got through to the point of being registered, unfortunately. It's quite a good vaccine actually, but it hasn't made it to market yet.
What's the sticking point?
It's a deletion vaccine, which under the Australian system puts it as a GMO, which complicates things, makes it harder to get it registered.
Your clinic now is one of the largest independent cattle-focused groups. Can you tell me a bit about it and how you got there?
If you say in New South Wales, because there's obviously Victoria that's larger, but we'd be one of the larger New South Wales livestock focus groups. I returned to Sydney in 2002, and at that point I was actually the only one.
The only
cattle vet at the uni, yeah. We did some research on pink eye and got some support there, and so I had a resident join me. Slowly but surely we worked with different clients, and it was largely word of mouth, I think, really. You try to look after the clients, you look after the animals, and then they talk to other people, and next thing you know, somebody else says, can you come and try to help me with something? But over the years, you build a team, you get some good people, and they do the same thing, and word of mouth works some more.
Is it clinic work, or are you out a lot? You're actually out on properties and doing the prevention stuff as well?
We have an interesting model. It's not a traditional model. So we're basically a university teaching hospital, so our mission is to provide education for students, but that's a clinical education. So to have the opportunity to teach them, you need cases, which means you need to get out and see stuff. So Camden's about an hour from Sydney, and it's an area that Sydney's encroaching on. So there's not a huge number of commercial livestock enterprises around Camden. There's a few farms, but you're getting more hobby farms around there. So one part of what we do is if you have people with pet livestock, they bring them in, and that's quite useful for teaching because they don't mind spending money and investigating things more deeply, which is informative for students. But our mission is really to support livestock and to support livestock enterprises. So that means we travel. So we have clinicians that travel as far north up to Kempsey, as far south as Nowra, and out west to Cowra. So some of those trips are like 4-hour drives or 4.5-hour drives. And we've done quite a lot of trips where we go for several days at a time. But we take students with us. We also have what's called interns and residents. So there'd be graduates who they've graduated and they've decided they would like to specialise or they'd like to sort of pursue livestock more. An intern would be somebody who's been out a short amount of time, and then residents have been out a bit longer and they're often wanting to do memberships or fellowships where they actually said, yes, I really do want to specialise. And then we support them through that process of learning so they can achieve that.
I'll ask you the same question that I did of Gilly. What advice would you give to your younger self or to other early career cattle vets, which you are dealing with anyway, obviously?
I think you need to pursue your passion. If you pursue what you're passionate about, you're not going to work every day. You enjoy what you do. What I encourage the people within the group is to identify an area of their interest. I'll say, well, you can be our local expert that works on nutritional related issues and can give advice on nutrition, for example, and then they can support other people in the practice and actually help further their education. Somebody else might be doing more mastitis or epidemiology. People think when you do cattle that you're specialising, but the reality is that's not a specialty. There's so many aspects. It's just like small animal, you've got oncologists, cardiologists and all that. Cattle's no different. There's facilities, there's reproduction, there's nutrition, infectious disease. So I guess our approach has been to try to identify what people are particularly interested in and build it. And then as a team, you end up with this bigger wealth of knowledge because you don't have time to become an expert on everything. It's really, the body of information grows every day. It's hard to keep up with everything, but if you allow people to be the expert in their area, they can actually help you as well, and then they help the whole team.
Asking both of you, I suppose, when you started out, could you imagine where you would have ended up in the industry?
That's a funny question actually for me. I remember when I was at university final year, I think it was the last few days, and we were sitting down on the grass having lunch with a group of friends, and I think I actually said, thank God I'll never have to go to university ever again. And I spent the rest of my career at university.
What about you, Gilly?
I just developed over time, being a country GP practitioner, whatever walked in the front door, that's what you had to go at. One of the biggest things I could give advice to any young vet, don't miss smoko if it's offered to you, because smoko or lunch, that's where you pull up and that's where you do your communications, that's where you do your extension work and you get to know the people, not just the client, you get to know the people and you talk about, you get to know the properties and you get everything like that. It's the most rewarding, it's like living in a community.
So here I'm going to bring in Alison Gunn, beaming in from East Gippsland in Victoria, where she runs a veterinary clinic and consultancy business, Herd Solutions. So Alison, tell me about your path.
I started in the UK and I graduated in a time when there were only a third of our year were females, and it was very much the norm for females to go and do small animal practice, not large animal practice, but I always wanted to be a farm animal vet from a very young age, probably too much James Herriot. So I came out to Australia after I'd been graduated about 18 months, came out here on a working holiday, got some amazing jobs with some amazing practices and haven't worked in the UK since. I did quite a bit of moving around Australia and I worked on Atherton Tablelands, I worked in Mount Gambier, all this time for really good large animal practices, and then ended up at the University of Sydney with John House for 8 years, working as a lecturer there before moving back to the family farm that was my husband's farm in Eastern Gippsland, where I've ended up setting up my own small veterinary practice, which also does a lot of consultancy and works with beef and dairy and sheep only.
Were there many differences between working as a cattle vet in the UK with probably smaller herds than there are in Australia, and also I guess there are probably distance differences and things like that as well. Did you find that there was a big difference or not so much?
I had never done a calving lying down in the rain with water running down my back. I'd always been indoors with a bed of straw and a gate to close the gate. And Australian vets wear overalls. In England, you'd never wear an overall because that was England's much more sort of class conscious. So you wouldn't wear overalls. So you'd turn up in your quite smart clothes and then put your waterproofs over the top. So just loved getting out there, getting dirty. I used to think it was glamorous. It took me till I was about 50 before I realised actually maybe being covered in cow shit wasn't actually glamorous. So slightly bigger herds, but it was still the same stuff. It was still working with farmers, and I guess that's what I really, really liked. And I really liked rural Australia and just the frankness and the openness of the people.
And are the farmers similar in both countries, or is there a difference in the interaction between the vet and the farmer here than what there is in the home country, if you like? Again,
more of a class system in the UK, in that as a vet, people that owned land were sort of one class. As a vet, you were somewhere in the middle, and people that worked on farms, looked up to you, and people that owned farms, well, you didn't own a farm. So I personally felt, and maybe I'm wrong, but I personally felt much more of that class system, and I hated it. What I loved about Australia was being able to get here, be good and really genuine about what I did and be appreciated and recognised for doing that, and just having great relationships with clients.
So tell me about your current practice. What are you doing on a day-to-day level?
We do a lot of routine preg testing, bull testing, some sheep work, disease investigations, some individual animal work, quite a bit of dairy work, which is definitely much more individual animal, sick cow. We also deliver a lot of workshops to farmers. So I spend a lot of time on farm and with farmers, getting to learn the business and really learning a lot about farming and encouraging them and helping them find ways to improve what they're doing and to learn from each other.
How do you keep up with new practices, new technology, new ways of doing things? Is there a formula that you follow?
No, not necessarily a formula. I've always been a bit of a techno nerd. My dad very early on got me into some very simple computer programming, and this was in the days when we literally only had a computer when I just about finished school at school. No one had home computers in those days. And that really set me up for life as an interest in how to program and how to work with computers. I've always really liked new technology, so that's really helped. I'm always curious about what's going on and what people are doing on farm, and loving to learn from what farmers are learning and what the opportunities are out there for them to streamline their business and introduce new technologies and techniques into their business. And something I think is really important is sometimes as a consultant you feel like you shouldn't show your weaknesses, but I learned this very much from John House actually. It's really helpful to say when you don't understand and know something and just ask, how does that work? I'm sorry, I've not seen that before, so please tell me. And I've probably gone from not wanting to show that as a weakness to now, often when I'm running a discussion group, I'm going, look, I might be the only person in this room that doesn't know this if you've got a guest speaker, but can you explain that to me? Because I don't know.
What would you tell your younger self or someone who is just starting out in being a cattle vet?
I think there's three things. Firstly, there's lots of different things you can do as a vet. I think a lot of people go into vet thinking they want to treat sick animals, and that's definitely part of it, but there is just so many more opportunities that you can take. My husband always says I've got the ability to reinvent myself. 1 minute I'm a dairy vet, the next minute I'm a beef vet, the next minute I'm doing sheep consultancy or something, the next minute I might even be running a project on pastures. There's so many different things you can do, and I really think you should take every opportunity you can if you're able to do it. Secondly, I think you need to think big. When I first graduated, I was this small female vet that was in this world of lots of quite, bigger male vets, and I think in those days, mindset wasn't a word, and personal development, there was nothing on personal development. But having now done some of that, I think if you think you want to do it, if someone else can do it, you can do it. That's always been my mantra. I spent a lot of my younger years being told I couldn't be a vet or I couldn't be a cattle vet. I wasn't smart enough. At 13, I wrote it down and said I want to be a vet and missed the ER out of the middle and was shamed in front of the whole class. Well, if you can't spell it, you'll never do it. And I've never forgotten that moment. And that probably steeled me going, yes, I can. And I've had other things like I applied when I first graduated for a university job and got knocked back. I was never particularly smart, never did well at uni. So I didn't get the university job, and so I really aimed to get a university job, and I've ended up, worked at MAFRA under Jacob Malmo and 4 amazing years there, and then another 8 years working with John House, doing lots of really interesting things. So yeah, definitely if you want to do something and you're persistent enough, doors will open, and go for it. And I think the third thing for the smaller vets is don't think you need size to be a cattle vet. I'm not the smallest female cattle vet around. There's definitely smaller. There is one thing I don't particularly enjoy doing, and that's when someone sends you out to disbud about 20 bulls. And I normally go, can one of the blokes do that? But there's very few jobs that, as a cattle vet, that you need strength and size to do. In fact, being a bit shorter means you don't need to bend down, and you can get away with a lot of tricks with just technique.
So you've all won Bovine Practitioner of the Year. It was 2014 for you, Gilly, 2020 for you, John, and 2024, Alison. What did that award mean to you?
I thought it was like a shot of Viagra for an old bull to keep me going. I was getting to a bit of age there. I was in my mid-60s, and it really came as a recognition probably of where I've been and where I've come from. Longevity in practice. Well, I never thought of doing anything else at that time. I hadn't any succession plans at the time. I hadn't thought of retiring. I didn't know there was such a thing. I was still in my prime probably. As students, I just love students. I give them a go, and I just loved the communications. Many of them lived in my house, and I shared a house with them. And I got to know them, and it was like anything else. It's never the conference, it's the après-ski, you get to know the people, and you can talk about stuff informally, which becomes very informative. Service to my clients, I just love my clients. Active in the community, recognition as part of that, and it was just really lovely.
That's a hard analogy to beat, isn't it, John?
It's difficult.
What was your view?
I guess I reflected on the fact that to receive the award, someone had to nominate you. I guess I took that somebody appreciated that maybe the efforts that I'd put in to try to support other people, and I guess it just reaffirmed to me that working towards that goal was a worthy cause, and very appreciative. You put a lot of effort in.
And Alison, what did it mean for you?
I'm told that a lot of the nominations came from other women who I had inspired to be a cattle vet, and I was just very, very honoured to receive that award.
Final question to all of you. Where do you think the cattle vet industry is headed? A couple of the challenges and the opportunities.
Okay. As a graduate, I was treating milk fevers and pulling calves, and on quite a lot of the farms that I go to now, they have a larger farm, so they have more milk fevers, and the staff are now treating the milk fevers. The only cow you get to see is the one that people have already tried and it didn't respond. It becomes more complicated. So a little bit of a shift that sometimes it's rather than you come out to treat the cow, it's can you work with the staff and train them and bring them up to speed. Can you problem solve why this problem is occurring and help us to prevent it occurring? You still need all the clinical skills to be able to identify the disease problem that's happening. But I see evolution to requiring a bit more sort of analytical and problem solving skills, a lot of people skills in that training side as well. What do you think, Gilly?
The future, I've thought about this often. Once you come outside the fishbowl, you get to my age and you start looking back in where you've been and where you're going, you do develop a different perspective on it. Individual cattle medicine, that's good. You still got to have your base knowledge of individual cattle diseases. Then the big job is to extrapolate that out to herd management, preventative medicine, and the whole environmental issues. And then, because it's a commercial operation, you've got to go back and analyse that data, converting it into cash converters, as I'd like to say. All your efforts has got to come down to make money. And that's a challenge, depends who you're working for. Every cattle vet's got to have that individual case study, hands-on, know about everything. But also, you've got to have the holistic approach running cattle is about growing grass. You've got to have something for them to eat. A couple of years ago at a ACV conference, at my last year as president, I hosted a debate whether agricultural science had more to offer the pastoral industry than veterinary science. And it was an interesting debate because they merge, and we'll call it the holistic approach. I'm talking beef, cattle, northern central Australia. A bit different to my other colleagues in the south, more intensive, but mine also goes into the feedlot. And I see the vet of the future doing their 5-6 years of clinical case work, so they got that knowledge, and then coming back into larger scale herd management, preventative medicine. You become a consultant when you've got that knowledge. And that's what I see the challenge to be to the food production cattle science, is a holistic approach. It's a big job, and I think very, very rewarding. The other challenge to particularly the cattle sector, sheep have consultants, pigs definitely have consultants, poultry have consultants. Most farmers, large-scale farmers now, don't even plant a crop until they consult their agronomist. And I think the big challenge for cattle consultants is for graziers to approach them and say, what will we do? Not ring up and say, what should we have done? I've got a lovely philosophy that I say for my morning prayer every day, and it said, a failure to plan on your part does not constitute an emergency on mine. But it's one I use, and I think about when things go wrong for me, because I didn't plan it, why should it be somebody else's emergency? I'd hate to face the challenges that I faced 50 years ago, but weren't the same as what they got today.
And Alison?
Don't get me wrong, I love working with cows and with individual animals, but I think as vets, we actually need to be on the front foot here because we are losing a lot of that work. The reality is that, you know, when you've got to travel half an hour to go and see an individual cow and half an hour back, to actually do that economically with the current cost of cattle is actually not sustainable, and many people don't necessarily want to afford that. So I really think, and this probably backs what both John and Gilly said, we absolutely have to be working at a herd level to make ourselves relevant. I was in the car today with a dairy farmer that had a very large number of cows, and he said, we have a no vet policy on our farm. And I said, I absolutely agree with you having a no sick animal policy on your farm, and I have one of those too. My mantra is I actually want to put myself out of business as a clinical vet. I would love to have all my farms with no sick animals, because I really think this is where we as vets on the production animal space need to be aiming to be able to work with the technology. Like, these big farmers are smart people, and they've got lots of collars that are giving lots of information on their animals. They, preg testing, lots of farmers are dropping pregnancy testing because they can tell off the collars if the cows are on heat or not. So as a profession, we really need to step up and be proactive in this space to keep ourselves relevant to beef and dairy farmers at a larger and commercial scale. Unfortunately, and we're not marketing cattle vets well enough, in that so many people want to do a vet because, Fluffy got sick when they were 4 and they just want to save dogs and cats. And that's certainly one important aspect of being a veterinarian. But there is this whole industry in Australia of beef and sheep and dairy that needs animal health input. And that used to be the domain of the vets. And we are losing that domain in lots of places. And we have the training to really improve these farmers' businesses, and we should be doing that.
Thank you all for your insight and your wisdom. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
No worries, Prue. Really enjoyed the chat.
So you heard the role of cattle vets is changing. A focus on herd management rather than individual animals is a common theme here from Alan Guilfoyle, John House and Alison Gunn. And don't miss out on Smoko. This has been So I Heard, a podcast commissioned by the Australian Cattle Vets, a special interest group of the Australian Veterinary Association. Background briefings by Ian McDonald. Editing and post-production by Drew Radford at Pod Talk. Music by Stuart Day. I'm Prue Adams. Thanks for listening.